Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Harden. I am a consultant with the city helping to moderate tonight's meeting. So happy to see so many names on the screen and so many faces. Before we jump into our plan for this evening, I want to turn the floor over to Moira to invite those who would like Spanish translation to have that translation service. Oh, I think you're muted, so can you unmute yourself, Moira?
I apologize. Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Moira Galo, seré la intérprete de hoy junto con Clara Guzmán. Aquellos que deseen la interpretación en español, por favor seleccionen la opción de interpretación, verán un globo en la pantalla, y luego de seleccionar idioma e interpretación pueden seleccionar el canal de español y tienen la opción también de poner silencio al idioma original. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
And Matt, can we go to the next slide that had some of the directions there? There we go. So we'll wait a second and let that translation room start. Perfect. Well, good evening again. Again, my name is Susan Harden. I'll be moderating tonight's session. Before we get started, just want to make a few introductions. There will be a number of folks that will be helping to answer questions and making presentations, and just wanted to make sure to recognize those folks. So first is Peter Gilley, who is the Community Development Director for the City of Ventura, also leading the general plan effort for the city. Also Neda Zayer, who is the Assistant Community Development Director, and will also be helping to respond to questions tonight's meeting, and is one of the leaders of the general plan as well. We also have Matt Ramey, who is the project manager on the consulting side of Ramey and Associates, and Simran Malhotra, who is also helping to lead some of the general plan efforts here in the city, and will be responding to questions in the chat as well. And with that, I want to turn the floor over to Heather Sumagaisai, who is the Public Information Officer for the city, to make a few opening comments.
Hi, Susan. Am I coming through okay?
You are.
That's great. Well, good evening, everyone. It looks like the 115 participants we have with us right now at this moment. I want to say hello. My name is Heather Sumagaisai. I am honored to serve as your Public Information Officer. When I came to the city just about 3 years ago, I fell in love with this tight-knit community who cares so much about Ventura's charm, its rich history, and one another. That shared commitment to Ventura is evident in the turnout in this evening's workshop, and I have no doubt that we'll continue to see that attendance grow this evening. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be here. Tonight, you are actively participating in official public processes, and I'm so glad to see so many residents, community members, business owners, and others take an active interest in the general plan and this evening's land use discussions. As you may have seen or read recently online, there has been information shared about the general plan, and there's been lots of questions and concerns about plans involving downtown businesses, buildings, and historic structures, which has resulted in some misunderstandings. One of the things I just wanted to share, if that's what brought you here today, that's great too, because we're so glad that you wanted to join this conversation and share your information with us and ask questions. To be clear, there are no city plans to put 6 to 7 story buildings along historic Main Street or to remove historic buildings. You will hear more this evening about the general plan, about land use alternative discussions, and please know that this is the second in a series of meetings that will continue with this discussion through September and October. The city is committed to providing transparent information and working with our stakeholders, our elected officials, and community members throughout this general plan process. We have done so for the last 1.5 years and will continue to do so. I cannot stress enough how much we value and encourage your input throughout this process. And as our general plan tagline states, this is collectively, the general plan represents our vision and our future. So with that, I'd like to close by sharing 3 quick tips for tonight's meeting. First, please know there are lots of ways to connect and engage with us on this topic. Tonight marks the second workshop, as I shared. This conversations, there are plenty of more opportunities in September, October. You will hear more about that shortly. And the intent of tonight is to provide an overview of what land use alternatives mean, why it matters, share various ways you can learn more and participate throughout this process. Secondly, the material you will see and hear may get technical and be detailed at times. Please don't feel discouraged if you feel a bit lost or confused. I can tell with you the first time I saw this presentation, some of this stuff was very technical for me. I don't come from a background as a planner. So we've adjusted this presentation after feedback from our first meeting to help with that. But please know if at any point you feel confused or you have questions and want to lean into this a little more, we are here to connect with you and we're here to answer your questions. And finally, please know when we say we are here for you, we have made a variety of opportunities to connect with you in various ways because we know everyone's busy and we know some ways work better than others for people. So please know if you have questions, write them down. There'll be various points during today that you can engage with us, and there are various points throughout the coming weeks to continue that engagement. And with that, now I turn it back over to Susan. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Heather. So I'm just going to take a minute to walk through tonight's agenda. Introductions and welcome, which we just did just a moment ago. We're going to start with the presentation, and we have modified the agenda a little bit from Tuesday evening to accommodate more time for question and answer. So there's a little bit more of a streamlined presentation, a couple of pauses for questions, and a little more time for question and answer than we had for Tuesday. We'll go through the Q&A, talk a little bit about next steps, and then have some time again for public comment. So we're really holding more space this evening for questions and answers and for public comment. We won't be going into breakout rooms to dig into the various sub-area alternatives, but we'll definitely let you know how you can get more information on each of those. But that's in order to save some time to allow for more of the interactive Q&A and public comment. We do have the meeting slated to end at 8:30. However, if we have enough people that want to make public comments and we don't have enough time for that by 8:30, we are willing to stay later to make sure we accommodate everyone who wants to speak in the public comment section. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Matt Ramey. Or not yet, actually, we're going to start with a poll. So for those that were there on Tuesday, you know that there was an interactive board where we asked people to put stickers on some demographic questions just so we could understand who was attending the meeting. And so we're going to do a version of that this evening through this live poll. And so Lily will go ahead and launch that poll, and you should see on your screen a number of different questions. So there's actually 6 questions on this poll, and we'll require you to scroll down in order to answer them. If you're not seeing the question on the screen, just you can let us know in the chat, and we can try to walk you through that. And maybe you can even post some information about yourself directly into the chat if you'd like to as well. So the first question is, tell us about your relationship with the city of Ventura. Do you live here? Do you work here? Do you live and work here? Or perhaps neither? Second question, if you live in the city, where do you live? And so there's options for Westside, Downtown, Midtown, Pierpont, College, Montalvo, Eastside, and other. So lots of choices there. And then if you live here, how long have you lived here? 1 year or less, 2 to 5, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, or 30 plus. And what is your age range? So 17 years or younger, 18 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and so forth. So we want to just get a kind of a sense of demographics here in our virtual room. And then with which race or ethnic groups do you most identify? Asian or Asian American, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino. And there's additional choices as you move through and scroll through this one as well. And you also can decline to answer that question. And then finally, do you own or rent your residence? So there's an option for rent or own or other. Perhaps the living situation could be a little different. So take just a little bit of time with that. Looks like we've got about 70% of our participants who have already answered those questions. So we'll give you another minute or two because it's a lot of information to fill out. And then we'll show you the results in just a second. So you'll be able to see what the responses were from everyone that's participating in this exercise. Let me see how we're doing on responses. I still see more answers coming, so we'll give people another minute or so. And this is, of course, not required. This just helps us have a little snapshot of who's attending tonight's meeting. I'm seeing the responses start to slow. Lily, why don't we go ahead and we can end the poll. I'm not seeing any more answers coming through. And so now we'll share the results. So you should be able to see there. Not sure if I scroll, do you see the changes, or Lily, do people have to scroll themselves?
They'll need to scroll themselves.
Okay, so you can scroll down to see the answers there, or the responses. We've got pretty similar between those who live and those who live and work in the city. So about half the group lives and works here. A good separation of where people live, so good representation across the city. And same with how long people have lived here. We certainly have majority, looks like almost 50% for those that have been here 30 plus years, but there's some representation for all of the other length of tenure as well. Age range, we're certainly missing some of the younger folks in the city, those under 30 years old, but we have some representation from the other cohorts. 67 or 68% white or Caucasian. So we're maybe missing a little bit of ethnic representation. And 88% of you own your home here in the city. So, but definitely have some renters here as well. So hopefully that'll lead to some good questions and answers when we get to that section. So we can go ahead, and now I'll turn the floor over to Matt.
Great, thank you, Susan. It's so nice to see everyone. Welcome for those who were here on Tuesday and who are back again. And welcome to those who have not, who were not here on Tuesday and are hearing about the land use alternatives for the first time. As Susan and Heather both said, the purpose of this meeting is to provide an overview of the land use alternatives, including the process for developing the land use alternatives. We want to provide this information so that you can take the online survey and provide your feedback. We know and understand that land use can be very complicated, and we know that the land use alternatives are very detailed. We do not expect immediate feedback tonight, but what we really would like for you to do is to take the time to listen and ask questions to understand the information, and then come back, review the information that is online and more that will be online, and then come and talk to us and ask us your questions, and then take an online survey to provide your feedback. As Heather said, we've updated the format tonight, so it's going to be a little bit higher level and allow some more time for questions and comments from the community. I want to point out that the website for the project, which is planventura.com, is evolving, and every day we are uploading more information about the alternatives and about the project. You will notice when you go to the website that there is now a tab at the top called Land Use Alternatives. And this page has and will continue to have information about the land use alternatives. So you have a one-stop shop for all of the information. Right now on the website, or soon this evening, there is a document called the Alternatives Primer, which provides some background information on the development of the alternatives. There are PDF maps of the land use alternatives. You will see some on the screen this evening, but we do understand that it is difficult to see individual parcels and to zoom in. So the PDF maps will allow you to do that. We have a summary of the land use alternatives in detail, and we'll show you more of what that looks like later. In fact, for those who are at the meeting on Tuesday, we have created much more detailed information to highlight the differences between the alternatives by outlining the areas where there are potential changes and use designation between each of the alternatives. We have the summary draft land use designations on there, and we have the summary of all of the engagement activities and surveys that have occurred so far in the process. However, more is going to be uploaded over the coming days, including the alternatives surveys. There are going to be individual surveys. We will have interactive GIS maps. So you'll be able to zoom in and click on individual parcels and see how the individual parcel is different between the different alternatives. And we are starting to build a frequently asked questions section. We heard lots of questions from the community on Tuesday night. We are putting these together to be able to answer as many of those questions as we possibly can. So please keep checking back to planventura.com, and you can also go there to register for emails, view documents, and view the events calendar. As Heather said, what we are doing tonight is an introduction to the land use alternatives. We are not expecting detailed feedback on the alternatives this evening. We are going to have lots of other opportunities for you all to provide feedback. We have a series of office hours coming up. Each one is 2.5 hours. You can see the dates here. And these are informal times for the community to drop in and ask us questions. We can pull up maps. We can talk through the thinking behind the alternatives. We can answer specific questions, and we can explore different alternatives that maybe we hadn't thought of. So these are very interactive times for you to come and listen and understand and ask questions and really dialogue with the general plan team. We are also going to each of the community councils. And at those community council meetings, we are going to dive deeper into specific geographic areas of the city and the land use alternatives for those geographic areas. You can see the dates here on the calendar on the screen, but they are starting next week with the West Side Community Council on September 7th. We are still in the process of scheduling the Pierpont Bay Community Council, and I spoke with some folks about having a downtown specific meeting. So needless to say, the number of meetings is still evolving and changing. At Tuesday's meeting, we also heard a lot about the question about water availability. We are going to, I believe in early October, schedule an educational forum on water and water availability and how that relates to the land use alternatives. We know it's an important question and we want to lean into that with you all, tell you what we know, hear concerns, and make sure that everybody is on the same page. And finally, we're going to have pop-up workshops throughout the city in September and October. So you will see the general plan team out in the community, handing out information and able to answer questions. In addition, we may have other meetings that come up. So again, please sign up on the website for emails so you can be informed about all of the activities that are going on. As I said before, the main source of feedback is virtual surveys. We have, and we will be putting up online 11 surveys for feedback on the individual areas. There will be one survey for citywide alternatives as well as the downtown. And we would recommend that you start with this survey. And then there are going to be 10 individual surveys for each of the areas of discussion. You do not need to take all 10 surveys. You can take one of them, you can take none of them, or you can take all of them. What we're trying to do with those individual areas of discussion is to dive deeper into each individual area and then perhaps even individual parcels within each of those areas of discussion to gauge public feedback and input. Right now, the surveys are limited to 1 per IP address. If you have multiple people in your household and each person wants to take the survey, which is absolutely fine, please contact the general plan team and we will enable that to happen. And the surveys are the primary sources of input. We are going to have the pop-up workshops. We are going to have the small group meetings with the community councils, but we would like everyone to take the survey so that we can have some more statistical information. They are opt-in surveys, so they are not statistically valid, but we will publish all of the results, all of the raw results, including all of the actual written comments we received from everyone. So there's full transparency into the process. On Tuesday's meeting, we heard a lot of questions and there were a lot of themes that came out of that. And I just want to reiterate some of those that we heard. You will see that actually in the presentation this evening, we have responded to some of them. We have not responded to all of them because of the time, but we will do so. So some of the common questions and themes were about the changes to the land use designations and how we moved from how those were created and whether they're draft or whether they can be modified. The answer is they can be modified, but we can talk about that later. There were questions about water, about the density, the state density bonus and what that means for the land use designations that we're proposing. There were questions about infrastructure necessary to support the evolution of the city over time, particularly around traffic. People were very concerned about the SOAR areas and agriculture, because open space and agriculture is such an integral part of the city of Ventura. There were questions about whether we could downzone parts of the city. And there were questions about how much growth was anticipated. And again, there were lots and lots of questions, both during the meeting itself, as well as during the open house portion of Tuesday's meeting. We are going to do our best in the frequently asked questions portion of the website to be able to respond to as many of these questions as we can. And the office hours are also another opportunity to ask questions. As a next step, I want to go into a little bit of background about how we got to where we are today. So I want to start with what the purpose of a general plan is. And we understand that at this point in the process, some of you may have been very involved throughout this general plan. Some of you were even involved in the last general plan, which was adopted in 2005. So we want to bring everyone up to the same level of knowledge. The first is that the general plan is a long-term policy document that guides the future actions of the city. It is a document that is required by the state, and the state has 9 required elements or chapters, as you can see here. One of the primary elements is the land use element, and that's what we're really going to be talking about tonight, because the land use element defines what the future allowed land uses are for every parcel in the city. The general plan update is, the general plan is updated about every 10 to 15 years. So the city is about right on schedule to update their general plan. And it comes at a good time because in the last few years, the state has thrown a lot of new requirements at cities that need to be responded to in the general plan. But more than a technical document, the general plan provides the opportunity for the community to come together in sessions like this to talk about its future. It's very rare, as you know, for a community really to come together and think about how it wants to stay the same and how it may want to evolve in the future, how it can capitalize on its strengths and make sure those strengths are preserved, and how it can address issues that are topics of concern for the community. So that's what a general plan is about. And there's more information on the website about the general plan and general plan requirements. The general plan process has been going on for about 1.5 years, and we have a 6-step process for creating the general plan. The first phase was discovery, where we created a series of existing conditions reports and also spent a lot of time out in the community, talking to residents, we had a survey to get an understanding of what the issues and opportunities were in the city. And then from there, starting really last summer and then all the way into the spring, we worked on visioning, and we created a vision statement, core values, and strategies in order to achieve the vision. And that is available online. It was also endorsed by the City Council on March 28th, 2022. We are now really in the main part of our work here on the general plan, which is the land use alternatives, and then starting this fall, the policy development. Land use alternatives are the opportunity to look at land use and transportation ideas, as well as to dive deeper into policies on various different policy topics of concern to the community. But again, this evening, we are focusing on land use alternatives. Once we decide on a land use direction and we look at policies, we will then put the plan together, and the plan will go through the review and adoption process. Throughout the process overall, there is a lot of community outreach and engagement. We have done quite a bit to date, and we are expecting to do a lot more outreach and engagement as we move forward. One of those core times that we're doing that is over the next 2 months with the land use alternatives. As I mentioned previously, there's a general plan website, and that website has lots of background information. It has videos and it has a calendar of events. We have had pop-up workshops throughout the community where we've gone out into the community, like standing on a street corner at the farmer's market to ask people what their opinions are. We have done a lot of advertising in local newspapers. We have done direct mailing to 42,000 residents and 32,000 water bill customers. We've done email blasts and reached over 25,000 subscribers. We've had a lot of meetings so far, particularly focused around the general plan advisory committee. The General Plan Advisory Committee is a 21-member committee that was appointed by the City Council that is a sounding board for the general plan team and helps us think through some of these critical issues. We've had 3 online surveys that have had over 4,000 responses. We've had a number of general plan videos. We have reached over 100,000 people on social media, and we've had thousands of public comments. So we've got a lot of input so far, and that is really the basis for the land use alternatives. But we know that even this amount of input that we've received is not enough. And we appreciate everyone being here this evening, and we look forward to the continued conversation. These are just some examples of some of the information that has been out there, some of our ideas, some of the website, and some videos that we've shown. As I mentioned, we just recently finished up the visioning phase, and this resulted in a vision statement that was endorsed by the City Council on March 28th. The vision is a statement of what the city will look like in the future, and it was developed through extensive community engagement and multiple meetings with the General Plan Advisory Committee. It is also serving as the basis for the land use alternatives and the topic-specific goals and policies in the general plan. The vision includes 3 components to it. It includes a vision statement, which describes in 3 paragraphs what the city aspires to be in the future, in 2050, really, which is our time horizon for the plan. It includes core values, which is the values of the community and the priorities. And then it includes about 20 strategies for how that vision will be achieved. Now, as we know, the vision is just a series of words, and the words are important. However, they can manifest themselves differently when it comes to the physical. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the land use alternatives. So the land use alternatives reflect some different ways that the vision can be implemented through land use decisions. I want to pause now, and we're going to do another quick live poll. Lily, if you could launch that poll. We want to get a sense from all of you about what level of experience you have with general plans, and then whether you have attended meetings for the general plan and been involved. And so we have 3 questions here. We have 4 questions here. The first question is, did you attend the in-person workshop on Tuesday, August 30th? The second question is, have you participated in a previous general plan update meeting or a survey? So as I've mentioned, we've had quite a number of meetings. And so the answers are yes, or I know this is my first meeting, yes, between 2 and 4, or yes, more than 4. And already I can see popping up on my screen that a lot of you are here for the first time, and that is great. The third is, how did you hear about the meeting? So we have some options here, including the website, community councils, newsletters, Facebook, Nextdoor, or other. And then fourth, how familiar are you with the content of the 2005 general plan? And this is always a fascinating question for me, because we get some people who at these meetings who have read every single word of it, and then some people who don't know what a general plan is, and all responses are really completely appropriate. I believe we are getting pretty close. We have about 65% of you who have completed the survey so far. We'll give this just another minute, and then
for those that are having trouble with the poll, don't worry, we're not using any of these responses in any kind of fashion. It's just try to make the meeting a little bit more interactive. So if you're having trouble, don't be too concerned. Some of these questions will be asked in the online survey as well. So that's where you'll get captured more of that information.
Yeah. And as with all of the information that we have this evening, this can be published will be published on the website, so you all can see it and have a record of that. Okay, we have about 75% who have completed the poll. Lily, do you want to go ahead and we'll wait about 20 more seconds, and then Lily, can you end the poll and share the results? Okay. Can you all see? I hope you all can see the results. And so what we have here is that most people did not attend the meeting. 88% did not attend the meeting on Tuesday night. So welcome everyone. There are about half of you who have never participated in any general plan update meeting or survey. And again, this is really great that all of you all are out here this evening. As Heather said, some of the information may get technical. Please don't worry, you can ask questions. Any question is fine, we're happy to explain. I will also point to the fact that there's resources on the general plan website, including a Planning 101 webinar that you can hear about planning activities. And then in terms of how you all heard about the meeting, it's pretty evenly distributed. A third heard about it through another source, 17% next door, 18% city newsletter, 10% city website. So you all are getting a lot of information from a lot of different sources. In terms of familiarity with the general plan, you all, there's 15% who have never heard of a general plan. Half of you have heard about it but don't know it well, and then 10%, 9% who use it regularly. So this is great. Thank you so much for that. So let's continue on with the presentation. Want to make sure everyone can still see my screen as we move along here. Susan, please let me know if my screen is not visible.
That's good.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next section we're going to talk about is land use designations. And for the 15% or so of you who don't know about general plans, this is going to be relatively new. So again, please feel free to ask questions either in the chat or when we get to the question and answer portion. So let's start with what is a land use designation. As I said earlier, the general plan has 9 elements or chapters to it that are required by law. And one of those central chapters is about land use. And the land use chapter, one of the main purposes of the land use chapter is to define the future allowable types and distributions and intensity of land use on every parcel in the city. The land use designations include a land use diagram or a map showing what uses are allowed on every parcel, and it establishes standards for density. Density is such as dwelling units per acre, or a non-residential measure of density, which is called floor area ratio, or the ratio between the amount of building volume, the square footage of the building, and the area, the square footage of a parcel, or the area of a parcel. So the land use designation must align with and reflect all of the other elements within the general plan, and the land use designations must be consistent with the city zoning code. As we go through some of the presentation this evening, we're going to be showing maps of the city. And just to make sure people are oriented to the city, this is your city. This is the city of Ventura. And as you can see in white here on the map is the area within the city limits. There's an area that is that's outlined in orange, which you see over here in Saticoy. You see my cursor, and up here on the North Avenue, that's called the sphere of influence. And that is an area that is outside of the city, but is an area that the city could at some point grow into in the future. The third boundary that you see here in orange is what's called the planning area, and that's the area that has an effect on what happens with the city. Now, again, just to orient you in terms of where we are, the downtown is where my cursor is moving here. Susan, again, please tell me if you can't see my cursor. The green are city parks and open spaces. So you can see the beaches here along the waterfront, along the ocean front. This is the harbor down over here. You have 101 moving through the city. Then you have 6 moving east to west, and through 33 moving north.
Now, if you noted
Matt,
that
could
they're
you
having a little trouble hearing you, sorry. Maybe you could turn your mic up just a little bit or your volume up.
I will try doing that.
Thank you, Susan. I was going to say the same thing.
Is this the first? Have you heard me until now?
We can hear you. It's just a little bit faint for some people, and some people
Okay.
are noting that they have to have their volume turned all the way up. So maybe just a little bit.
I will lean in a little bit to the presentation. Let me know if this is any better. And again, please Susan, Netta, please interrupt if this is not any better for folks. Okay, so that's essentially the orientation of the downtown. Again, this is the orientation of the city. This is the downtown. These are the midtown corridors in the midtown area. The mall is over here. And then this is, if you see down in the lower right-hand corner, this is the area where the auto mall is.
Matt, maybe just pause just for a second. I think there's still some folks who are saying they can't hear very well. So maybe, I don't know if you can look at your volume settings, or maybe just everyone on the call. There is in Zoom, if you go to the little button where the microphone is, there is a place you can select audio settings. And that also allows you to turn your speaker up as well. So that maybe you need a combination of Matt's volume and yeah, yours is pretty high. So I think.
Yeah, you all are seeing my volume, huh?
That's a lot better.
That's a lot better. Okay, good. It was adjusting my volume. So this works?
I think it's better. Let's see.
Okay. All right. We'll do this next slide and then pause and make sure you all can still hear me. Okay, so the general plan has land use designations already. So this map, which is too small for you to read the details of, that's okay. It's all online. This map shows the distribution of land uses in the city, and the table on the right describes what those land use designations are. Right now, in the general plan, there are only 9 land use designations. So it is not very detailed. If you think about your city and you drive through the city, there are so many different types of uses, so much different character of the types of buildings. And so right now we only have 9 designations that are describing what could potentially be allowed. Just a couple of quick note of the colors. Yellow is generally residential, red is generally commercial, and purple is industrial. Green is parks and open space, and blue is public. So that gives you a sense of what those colors mean. The city also has a zoning code. The zoning code regulates in much more detail the specifics of what can happen on every parcel in the city. It is required by state law to be consistent with the general plan. And it again has much more detail on what uses are allowed, the intensity of development, and then any site standards such as setbacks, building requirements for open space, for parking, transitions with adjacent uses. And again, this map here on the right, you're not expected to be able to read it at this point right now, but the city has about 50 zoning districts. So a lot of detail in zoning and not a lot of detail in the general plan. Some may be surprised to hear that at this point, the city's existing zoning code allows 6-story buildings. Now we know that the city the residents of the city like the low scale of the buildings. The views are critical. Views of the mountains, the views of the ocean are really critical to be preserved. But right now, the city's zoning does allow 6-story buildings in some places. And there are 5 residential and mixed-use zones. Mixed-use zones allow residential and non-residential uses on the same parcel. And then 4 non-residential zones that allow 6-story buildings. You can see a map of these areas in blue. And again, let me orient you a little bit here. So where my cursor is, this is Ventura Avenue on the west side. You can see the industrial areas here that allows 6 stories. This big patch of blue down on the south side of 101 is Arundel and North Bank. The Victoria corridor here allows 6-story buildings through its development code. This parcel over here is Pacific View Mall, and that area currently allows 6 stories. And then all throughout the east side, you can see a lot of these blue parcels, these blue squares. These are the commercial shopping centers, and they currently allow 6 stories at this point. And so in total, about 11.5% of the city's area allows 6-story buildings. So the question now is, we're working on our general plan. Why do we need to create new land use designations? Why does this matter? Why can't we just keep the designations that we have now? The answer is that Ventura's existing land use regulations, both general plan and zoning, are not consistent with state law and legal precedent, and this creates some issues. The general plan and zoning need to be in much closer alignment than they are now, and the courts have recently ruled that the general plan will overrule zoning in every situation. So in other words, if you allow housing on one parcel in the general plan, and on that same parcel, it's zoned as industrial, that means that it's actually a parcel where you can build residential. So it's really important that we make sure that the general plan and the zoning are in alignment. We also know that we need to look at the land use designation map because we need to implement the new general plan vision statement, and most importantly, to respond to the thousands of community comments and feedback that we've received throughout the public engagement process. We know there's not uniformity about what the community wants to see in the future, but the land use designations are an opportunity to make sure we are right sizing everything for Ventura. And then finally, we want to make sure that the new designations provide more clarity and transparency on development decisions. Right now, we have created proposed draft land use designations. We've created about 30 of those designations. And again, I want to reiterate that these are drafts and they can certainly be modified throughout the process. The land use designations right now are organized into 5 broad categories. Residential designations, which are for residential only areas of the city. Think about the single family neighborhoods and the areas with townhomes. Mixed use, which allows for a vertical mix of uses where you may have ground floor retail and then residential or office above that. Or horizontal mixed use, where you might have residential right next to a retail building. Then there are commercial designations that provide areas for retail and offices and service uses. For the most part, these do not allow residential, with one exception, which is the neighborhood commercial designation. And I'll talk about that one in just a minute. The 4th category is for employment, and that is for a range of the job-producing uses, including industrial, manufacturing, research and development, and office uses. And the final category is public and institutional, which is the broad range of public and institutional uses, including parks, open spaces, hospitals, and schools. At the last meeting on Tuesday, there were lots of questions about how we got to the land use designations, how we related land use designations from zoning, and then created what we are calling, and what you will hear this evening, as the base land use designation map. So I'm going to go into a little bit of technical detail now. For those of you who don't know about zoning and don't know about general plan designations, some of this is probably going to be confusing. But again, as Heather said at the beginning, don't worry. We're trying to have this presentation for a wide diversity of audiences, and you can ask questions and then come to our office hours and ask further questions at that point as well. So overall, the proposed designations are based almost directly on the existing zoning districts. We started with zoning because it was much more detailed. Again, we wanted to make sure that there was much more clarity in the general plan than there is today, so that when someone looks at the general plan and they see what's allowed on that parcel, if you're a neighbor to that parcel, you know what's going to be built, So we wanted that transparency in the process. For the residential zoning, what we did was we tried to create a one-to-one correlation between the zoning districts and our proposed designations. So the range of density that's allowed in zoning district, we tried to mirror that in the proposed land use designations, so that all of the residential parcels are not considered a rezoning. We wanted to maintain stability in those areas. There were a few places where we had to change the designation. There's a zoning district called RPD, or Residential Planned Development. And in that case, we looked at what was actually built on the ground, because it was everything from low density single family homes all the way up to 4-story residential. So we went parcel by parcel and tried to identify the specific building that was there and then apply a land use designation to match what was there. We also have commercial zones, which in zoning lingo is C1, C1A, and C2. These are called commercial in existing zoning, but in reality, they are mixed use zones. They allow residential, and if you build any commercial component, there's unlimited density with that residential. There are essentially two distinctions, and that has to do with the number of floors and the height. C1A is 3 stories and 45 feet. C1 is 3 stories and 45 feet. And we gave that a land use designation of mixed use 1. You'll hear about the designations in just a minute. And then C1A and C2 actually allow 6 stories and 75 feet in mixed use buildings. So we called those mixed use. The city also has something called form-based districts, which it's created through area-specific plans, known as specific plans. And this is particularly for the downtown, the midtown, and the Victoria corridor. In this situation, there is the form-based districts do not have density standards. And so what we used is we used the height, the maximum allowed height of any floor in the building, and then applied the mixed-use district for that. So for example, what they allow in the form-based zone is a 2-story building for most of it, with 50% allowed on a 3rd floor, we called that a 3-story mixed-use building. Now we understand that a lot of thought went into those specific plans and how much you could build on that top floor. And we realized that there's 2 ways of doing this. One is to allow the detail to occur in the zoning and maintain the current zoning. The other, which we heard on Tuesday, is to be more specific, where only a percentage of the top floor can be built and create additional land use designations, which is a comment that we are thinking about at this point. The industrial areas, they are M1 and M2, which M1 is light industrial and flex, and that's 3-story buildings. And the M2 is the general or heavy industrial areas. Right now, the M2 in zoning allows 6 stories and 75 feet. We received feedback through the process that that was way too high and too tall for an industrial district. And so we responded by lowering heights to 3 stories in that area, so that you will see immediately in the change that there are many fewer areas in the city that allow 6 stories just because of this change. The city is in the coastal zone, and so we created coastal specific land use designations. And then in looking at the range of uses that the city has now and that the city may have in the future, we created a series of new proposed designations. One is for commercial only, that does not allow residential uses, because right now most of your commercial zones allow residential. We wanted to make sure there were some areas that didn't. We have a neighborhood center designation, which is mostly retail, that allows a little bit of residential. And then we have more specific public and institutional land use designations. So I'm going to move through these quickly, and these are all available online so you can dive in detail. This is the range of residential designations, from residential very low at less than 1 dwelling unit per acre, all the way up to 4-story multifamily buildings. And again, these really mirror the existing zoning districts in the city. We then created a series of mixed use designations, which correspond to the different heights of buildings. Now, we've gotten some feedback that the nomenclature here is a little confusing, so we will definitely change that. We did not have time after Tuesday's meeting, so bear with me for now. So we have mixed use 1, which is up to 3 stories. We will probably change this to mixed use 3 to make it clearer that it's 3 stories. There's also a coastal mixed use zone, which right now is identical, but that's going to be for uses and parcels in the coastal zone. So mixed use 2 is 4 stories, mixed use 3 is up to 5 stories, mixed use 4 is up to 6 stories. And again, mixed use 4 corresponds to the existing C1A and C2 zoning districts. We also have 2 existing zoning districts called harbor mixed use and coastal mixed use, which are being brought over as land use designations 1-to-1. We have a series of non-residential designations, including commercial. As I mentioned, that's without residential. The neighborhood center is primarily commercial, but allows residential for a portion, about 1/3 of the site, in 3 to 4 story buildings. There's a new designation for office and R&D uses to try and generate more economic development and attract more office uses in the city. Right now, this is the second district or second designation that we are proposing that allows up to 6 stories and 75 feet. Again, there are only 2, mixed use 4 and then office R&D. Light industrial flex is similar to M1, and the general heavy industrial is similar to M2, but only at 3. And then we have hospital. And finally, we have the public and institutional uses, which you see here, again, to add clarity within the land use map. We then, yes.
They're just going to make a quick Zoom note for folks that may not be familiar with Zoom. There's some comments that they're having some trouble with the graphic. I just want to note for people, if you hover your mouse, there's a little rectangle bar between the graphic and all the vision or the photos of the people in the videos. If you put your cursor over that, that allows you to change how much of the people you see and how much of the graphic that you see. So that may help a little bit for those that are seeing that the graphic might be too small. So just a note.
Yeah, and again, tonight's about listening and hearing and then asking questions with time to go back and look at the materials afterwards and ask questions again in the future. So we then took those land use designations and applied them and did a correspondence table between existing zoning and the proposed land use designations, and then applied those to the map. That worked about 80% of the time for about 80% of the city. But we found a lot of places where there was some strange things that were going on, like the RPD, as I mentioned previously, the residential plan development or the commercial plan development, where things didn't match. It didn't match what was on the ground and what was clearly going to stay. And we needed to make sure that there was more clarity. There were also residential uses in the commercial where they're just clearly along the freeway interchanges. And so we made a few changes to those land uses and then tried to come up with this base draft land use designation map. And again, this is a draft. This is our first attempt at translating zoning into the proposed designations. This map can be modified, and we expect it will be modified over the coming months. And the reason that this is important is because this is the base that we are using to compare the alternatives to. So all of the alternatives that you're going to see in a couple of minutes are compared to this base map. There's also the question that has come up throughout the process about what the proposed capacity is for the general plan. How much development is going to happen and how much development are we planning for? So the first is that we're planning until 2050, which is 27 years after we expect the plan to be adopted next year. This is a broad capacity number, and what you're going to see is a capacity number of the broad range of what we're aiming for through the alternatives, but we don't know whether the alternatives are going to achieve this yet, especially the preferred alternative. So, and that number is approximately 2 to 3 times what's called the RENA cycle. For those who aren't planners, the state requires and the region requires that that each city plan for an amount of housing units over an 8-year period. This past RENA cycle was very high at 5,300 units for the city of Ventura. It doesn't mean that the city has to build that amount of housing. It just means that the city has to have the space for it to be built through the development regulations. And so what we are doing, because the RENA cycle is 8 years, and we are doing a 27-year plan, we are planning for 2 to 3 times the RENA cycle. Again, that's the broad range of what we're looking at right now, of what we're targeting, but we may not be able to even achieve this through the final proposed land use plan. And that's actually okay, as long as we have enough capacity in the city to allow the time. Now, these numbers may look a little bit scary, but when you actually look at them, it's about 1% growth in residential units per year. What we've seen historically is a lot less than that. So again, even though you allow the space for it and you have the regulations for it, it doesn't mean it's going to happen because it's based on the individual decisions of each landowner. The total non-residential is at a 1.39 jobs to each housing unit. And that comes out to about 15,000 to 22,000 jobs over the time horizon of the general plan. And this amount was endorsed by the City Council on July 11th, 2020. too. And it is also a number in terms of the amount of growth, at least for the jobs and for the lower end of the housing, that is not significantly different than what was planned in the last general plan. Okay, so let's pause here.
Yeah, just a time check too. We want to definitely save enough time to have some questions on the alternatives and for public comment. So
that was the longer part of the presentation.
Maybe we could pause here for a couple of verbal questions. If anyone wants to raise your hand virtually, there's a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, maybe under the little smiley face called reactions. Or if you're having trouble there, we'll try to watch you on your screen and see if anyone's physically raising their hand as well. But I know there's been a lot of questions that are in the chat, and we're trying to answer those. I think I see Alejandro, and then I saw Lynn. So let's go Alejandro first, and then Lynn. And you.
Yeah, just my only question is where I haven't seen anything regarding water. I haven't seen any conversation, any highlight, any display, any words using the word water. And so where does that water component come into all of this?
Peter, would you like to answer that?
Yes, Alejandro, there was a slide earlier that did talk about we are going to have a session on water, because this also did come up on Tuesday. Our water department has all the information about our current water supply and plans for future water supply. And based on the amount of growth being projected, again, over the next 27 years, the information we have shows that there will be ample water supply. But we are going to have a session that goes into that and shows the details on that in the near future.
Great. Lynn, if you'd like to unmute you, you can ask your question.
A couple questions. First of all, there's no mention of quality of life, which is something that we value very deeply here, and that has not been addressed at any level. Water is an issue, and I mean, it's though Mr. Gill protests that in fact there will be plenty of water. There's not plenty of water in Oxnard or Camarillo or Thousand Oaks or any place else, or Ojai. So that's, and given the ongoing drought, the 1,200-year drought, that seems suspicious at the very least. Houses are basically very fancy faucets, which Goleta figured out a long time ago. And so unless we address water going in, I think that we are in great trouble.
Great, thank you, Lynn.
Maybe I'll start and try responding to that. Lynn, great questions. Thank you. Yeah, quality of life is, was the number one thing overall with all of the visioning. The majority of people absolutely love the quality of life in the community, and that is really the basis of the vision. And the idea here is that the land use designations are trying to improve the quality of life for people who are here, and also address issues that came up during the process. And again, we know there's very different opinions about what that means, but I think there was agreement that that people love the quality of life in the community, and they don't want life negatively impacted. So that absolutely is important. And if you go back and look at all of the past documents, the visioning, the work that was done, the surveys, you'll see that comes through very clearly in all of that work. In terms of water, I want to reiterate that, we understand, like, it's very odd for us in a way to think about, like, to do this and say, hey, we're going to talk about, 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 housing units, when at the same time you're being asked to conserve water in the community. And either, right? So we understand we are required to look to the future. We know that communities are going to grow and evolve. And we also know that overall, as a state, we need to figure out our sources of water. So it is something that has to be balanced at the city level, at the regional level, as well as at the state level. All we can do is plan now. We'll hear about the water later in a separate meeting, but we do understand this apparent dichotomy that we're talking about.
We've got 4 hands up, so I'm going to go with those 4 hands that were up, and then we want to move on to the next portion of our presentation so we can save enough time for Q&A there too. So Leslie, I'm going to unmute you if you'd like to pose your question. I saw you put one in the chat as well, but it was a different question that you want to. Oops, there we go. Go ahead, Leslie.
Actually, that's pretty much my question. In terms of the housing that is being built and will be built, a lot of it seems to be for out of town people and very expensive. And how do we keep it to be actual housing for people in the community and that want to live in the community? And, you know, it's not for speculators or investors.
It's a good comment. So I think.
Yeah, you know, there's not a simple answer to that. And it is a question that lots of communities in attractive places such as Ventura are dealing with. So, you know, one thing is, you know, the city has been thinking a lot about affordable housing and how we get more affordable housing in the city, because housing prices are going up, and how do you stabilize the rents in the community and allow the people who are here now to stay here and who may be in overcrowded conditions to make sure that they are not in overcrowded conditions anymore and can remain in the community. So it's not an easy answer. It's not exactly a land use question, but it does relate to the housing policy, and it is something that's part of the broad housing discussion.
And Annette and then Kate. So Annette first.
Hi, my name's Annette Ayala. I'm a member of the Barbareño Ventureño Band of Mission Indians. I'm 11th generation Chumash in Ventura. And my comment, it's more of a comment, but there is a question tied to it, is, you know, we're talking about land use. Why do we have to use it? Why do we have to build on that? We're not talking about preservation whatsoever. And just from a personal standpoint, there's so much history already removed. Every single time we develop, there's history being removed. Do we even know the archaeology? It's my understanding downtown Ventura hasn't had an appropriate archaeological survey. So we're just removing history in the benefit to benefit finances and bringing people to Ventura. You know, most of my family can't even afford to live here now, you know, and it's pushing more people out the more that we develop here. And it's my understanding that we're borrowing water from Ojai. So how does that make sense? You know, I think Casitas Municipal is my water down here in downtown. So I'm just, you know, there's the concern of the preservation and whatever resources we do have now. I know native plants to some people don't mean anything, but to my ancestors, they were 100% our survival. And, you know, as we develop, we lose touch with not only the land, but actual like people. You know, we're losing connections as we continue to develop in the interest of finances. And so my question to you, and I did hear you say, just because this is the plan doesn't mean we have to build on it. So why aren't we talking about preserving what we have now and not continuing to build and develop?
Thank you, Annette.
I'll try and answer. You know, it's a great question. It's a philosophical question to a certain extent. Cities are places that evolve over time. They're in constant change. They're in constant flux. You can't always see that change that is happening. A lot of what we are talking about for a lot of the area of the city, as we'll see coming up, is about preserving what's there. But we do need to think about areas that can evolve. There are areas that are underutilized that could be really contributing to the community in positive ways that aren't necessarily doing that now. And those are the areas that we're talking about to make sure that whatever is there and places that have been built on are being built and are contributing in really positive ways to the community. And so that's where a lot of the focus, not all of the focus, but a lot of the focus of the conversation is.
Kate, and then I see Gina, you raised your hand as well, so we'll squeeze you into this round. Go ahead, Kate.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but also just to go off the last comment as well. I grew up here in the 80s and 90s, and I just moved back to be near my family, and I lived down in San Diego and LA. And I will say, moving back, that this is happening all over Southern California. And I'm very protective of Ventura because I don't want it to happen here, because it happens so fast. These developers come in and they take over the entire town. And it just scares me to see all of this. But also, our roads are so bad. What about infrastructure? What about the design? All I see are in these renders are just, it just looks like LA. Like, how do we keep our character when it's just being taken over by outside developers who don't really care about our town?
So I hear two questions there. One, Matt, about how is infrastructure being addressed, and then how is design also being addressed? In addition to the concern that Kate expressed about just development.
Yeah,
Peter, maybe I'll let you answer that question.
Just piggybacking off the last comment, again, why? We should be preserving land here. We shouldn't be having 5-story buildings on Olive. Like, that's crazy. I'm sorry, it's a small street.
Do you want to answer as a high level some of the impetus to this?
Yeah, sure, Beth. So there's definitely, as part of the general plan update, there will be analysis of all the infrastructure needs for all of the future growth. But before we know what the infrastructure needs are, we need to decide what do we want that future alternative land use alternative to be. So the purpose of this engagement phase that we're in is to get input on a variety of land use alternatives, see what the community has the most interest in, and then really dig into the details on all the infrastructure and services that will be affected, by that. Circulation, traffic, all the utilities, parks. So all of those are going to be looked at, but the staging of the update process starts with talking about what should the future layout look like.
Thanks, Peter. And then let's go to Gina, and then we'll move on to the alternatives part of the presentation. Go ahead, Gina.
So just piggybacking on the infrastructure. So are you saying the general plan will not be approved and completed until an infrastructure report is done, and also an environmental study is the question that I have? And then I noticed that a lot of the commercial space that we have off the avenue is being eliminated and residential is being put in. And even though I know people don't like industrial or commercial, these are people's jobs. Where is that all going?
Well, let me talk about the alternatives part. We're going to get to that in a second. Particularly around the avenue, there really aren't areas. We did our best to preserve the light industrial, heavy industrial, the jobs throughout the whole city. What you're actually seeing, I think, is what you will see, and when you look at the maps, is what I mentioned previously, which is that the zoning, which says commercial, actually allows mixed use right now. And so we are right trying to make the clarity of what already exists in the zoning code. And then in terms of the infrastructure, this right now, infrastructure generally follows development and responds to development rather than the other way around in terms of where growth is. So you plan for where the growth is, and then you plan for the infrastructure. And so that's what we need to do now. So we first have decisions to make about what the future will look like, what the land use pattern will look like, if it will change, how it will change, and then the infrastructure will come after that. And then, yes, the plan will not be adopted without an environmental impact report. That is required by law, and that will happen.
I'd say, Matt, if you want to jump into the alternatives, that would be great.
Okay,
Again, we'll pause for questions again after this portion.
Let's keep moving through this, and I'll move through these relatively quickly. Again, a lot of this information is really online. So the question is, when we start, is what are land use alternatives and why are we doing them? We talked about that a little bit so far, but the physical form of the city evolves. Every city evolves over time, whether it's areas are deteriorating or whether they're redeveloping. So the question is, how do we want the city? How do you want the city to evolve over time? And that's what the land use alternatives look like. It's really defined to implement a range of ideas that happen during the engagement process. Again, we heard a lot of ideas. We heard don't grow at all, and we're hearing some of that tonight. And then we also heard a lot of upzone everywhere in the city. We need more housing, we need more jobs, we need more economic development. And so what we're doing is creating alternatives to respond to a lot of the things that we have heard. It allows us to implement the vision and guiding principles, which is partially about improving the quality of life in the community. And the alternatives really help the team understand the community's direction on land use, such as the overall mix of uses, the intensity that you want to see, and essentially building heights and densities in different areas of the community, where new development should be targeted, and then maximum building heights in different areas. We have been working on the land use alternatives for quite a while. This graphic just shows a series of the steps that we have done, but we've done community visioning surveys about where new development can go. We've had lots of conversations with the General Plan Advisory Committee. And then we are here in this orange box where we are doing engagement on the ideas that you're going to hear. There's a couple months of engagement, and then those ideas are going to go, and the results are going to go to our General Plan Advisory Committee, the committee who's a sounding board for us. And then the alternatives will then go to the Planning Commission and the City Council. And ultimately, it's the City Council's decision about what the land use direction is. So we have lots to do for the alternatives. We are just at the beginning, or right in the middle of that process. As I mentioned, there was a visioning survey early on about a year ago, which I asked the question of where new development should go in the future. And people were asked to place a dot on a virtual map. They could place as many dots as they wanted for different areas. We had about 1,500 people respond to the survey. And what you see here is just a snapshot of some of the aggregate maps of what the results were. And so just to sort of correspond, if you see this mixed use map in the upper left-hand corner, this is essentially the avenue, the downtown, and then the midtown corridors over to the mall. The darker the red means the more people who responded to put dots on the map in that area. So these are called heat maps, and you can see the red is the hotter, which means more people put more dots in that area. Retail, look at over on the far east side of the city. It's the strongest. People wanted a lot of retail, new retail on the east side. And so we begin to see the patterns which helped us create the alternatives. This then helped us create this map, which we call the areas of discussion. And these are the areas where we are discussing whether there should be land use changes, not whether there will be land use changes, but the areas that we are discussing. So you see the areas in blue. Again, this is, you see the 101 freeway moving here. Area 2 is the downtown, 1 is the west side, and you can see all of the different areas. And these correspond directly with some of the maps that I just showed you, the heat maps. And then we spent a couple of months working with the General Plan Advisory Committee on these areas. Once we had the areas of discussion identified, we had a series of meetings with the General Plan Advisory Committee, which was also open to the public, to help us generate ideas for the land use alternatives. Those meetings were April 17th and then May 16th and 17th. The public was also at those meetings. We had, I believe, close to those meetings combined, and they put ideas on the map as well. We started with blank maps of these different areas of discussion, zoomed in, and there were stickers and sticky notes for people to put their ideas down. So we also got thousands of ideas through our online surveys over the last year and a half. We had stakeholder interviews. So it was the GPAC plus a lot of other ideas throughout the process that we then looked at and tried to combine into some very broad themes. And those themes are coming through in our citywide alternatives. And so I want to start here with what we call the areas outside of the areas of discussion. Remember, I just showed this map in the lower left called the areas of discussion. The areas in white that you see in the map are areas where we are not proposing land use alternatives. We're trying to do a lot of matching up between what's allowed now in zoning and what would be allowed in the future. Now, again, there were some changes in designations, so it's not a one-to-one, but that's the map that you see here, this large map that you see here on the right. Again, my pointer, this is the downtown here, just to orient you. This is North Bank and Arundel, and then you have over on the east side, over on the city here, you have the harbor area and Pierpont. And so what you see is each color represents a different land use designation. The yellows and the browns are residential and the reds are commercial. The grays, as you see sort of over here in Satakoy, those are industrial, and blue is public. This is the fairgrounds here along the ocean. So we are not proposing changes in alternatives to this area, but you can certainly comment on it, and there may be an evolution of this map over time. So if you have questions about this, we'll definitely take those questions throughout the alternatives process. So the reverse of that, areas outside of the areas of discussion, is what we call the base alternative. And this is the base land use designations for the areas of discussion. And so you see the colors on the map here. Anywhere that you don't see a color is an area that is outside of the areas of discussion that I showed on the previous map. And this is a correspondence, as best as we could, to the existing zoning, with some of the differences that I mentioned previously. So again, to orient you, the downtown is over here. You see the two fingers coming off of it. This is Main Street and Thompson. This big purple area here, this big purple rectangle is Pacific View Mall. And then the gray is the job producing area over here, North Bank. This is the Auto Mall. This is the Johnson Drive corridor. And this is the county complex here along Victoria. So this is the base land use designations, and this is what we are comparing the alternatives to. So we created essentially three designations to explore, three alternatives to explore different ideas about how the city could evolve over time. Again, to respond to the need to accommodate some housing in the future, but then lots of different questions about where that could go and what land use changes might be needed in order to accommodate them. And so the first alternative is what we call the core alternative. And this alternative focuses land use changes around the downtown area here, along the commercial corridors of Thompson and Main Street, around the Five Corners area, and then moving out a little bit. And this is Ventura Community College, this blue rectangle here. So moving out into this area, some changes. It also looks at some changes along Johnson Drive here to allow a little bit more residential in this area. So again, this alternative, the core alternative, really looks at any land use changes and trying to focus new development on an area. Essentially, if you draw a vertical line from Pacific View Mall, generally to the west of this. Now, we also made some proposed changes here because we know that that the west side has had challenges during fires in terms of evacuation. So we tried to minimize change for the most part on the west side over here, although there is one possible change here for residential, which is on the school district site here, this big orange rectangle that my cursor is on right now. The next alternative is what we call the expansion alternative. And again, I know that that even having proposing any increases in heights, we know that is a challenge for some. Now we're stepping into really challenging territory here. But we did hear through the community process that there was an interest in looking in some of the agricultural areas on the east side of the city as a potential place for expansion. So when we look at the east side of the city, when we look east of Pacific View Mall, there's actually not a lot of opportunities for adding residential except within the existing residential neighborhoods or within the large undeveloped areas, which are currently agriculture. So you can see these areas here. And so this focuses really, again, tries to focus growth on the east side of the city in the agricultural areas, as well as along Johnson Drive here and what we call the Johnson corridor, and then some here along Victoria. And a lot of this is already allowed now for residential, but it tries to focus a little bit more in this area. And again, between the core and the expansion, these are really, in a sense, hypothetical extremes of what we heard from the process. Some people said, build the bases, don't do anything, just keep everything the way it is. Then we have the core, which is we should really be building around the downtown and the area around the downtown because there's more mix of uses, there's more services, there's more vibrancy. The other said, let's look at what would happen if we grow to the east. and what that would look like. And that's the expansion alternative. The third alternative is what we call the distributed, which looks at a little bit more evenly balanced amount of development throughout the entire city. So there are some land use changes in the downtown, a little bit on the west side. There's actually a lot of downzoning on the west side, particularly along the avenue and along Olive. In fact, all of the alternatives that you're looking at, core, expansion, and distributed, actually have downzoned and proposed lower designations along Ventura Avenue as well as along Olive. And this one looks at some of the agricultural areas known as the SOAR areas, but not all of them. And then looks at some land use changes for some more office development over in the southeast side of the city along Highway 101. Now, I will say that in comparing these, there are an infinite number of other possibilities. And in fact, at Tuesday's meeting, people came up with lots of other ideas, and we can certainly explore more of those ideas through conversations over the coming months. One person asked me, is like, why can't we just build in the residential neighborhoods? Let's allow 2, 3, or 4 units in all of the single family areas. And can that be an alternative? So there's lots of ideas that have come up. But again, the 3 main alternatives that we're looking at right now are, one is the core. You can see on the map here, this is where the land use changes are. Really more a little bit in the downtown, but then along the corridors. Then the expansion, and you can see the colors on the map here on the east side of the city, and then distributed, which is really, again, that hybrid between the two. Now, we did some basic analysis of some of these alternatives. This graph shows the percent of an area of the city and the areas of discussion. Areas of discussion is red. Within the city is the blue. And we looked at how much of the city, what percentage in each of the alternatives, the city or the areas of discussion, would be 6 stories. Again, this is all designations. In the areas of discussion in red, existing zoning is 40%. And then in the city is 11.5%. With the baseline, because of some of the changes we made, particularly to the non-residential, but also to some of the residential, the mixed use designations, you see that it drops significantly to the base. And then each of the alternatives, and you can see that each of the alternatives is significantly less than existing zoning. However, the core, expansion, and distributed are also a little bit higher, in some cases twice as high, in the areas of discussion for what allows 6-story buildings. And again, this is in the office and R&D, as well as the mixed use 4 designations. Those are the only 2 with 6 stories. This breaks it down a little further, and it shows the only residential acres, the percentage. Again, red is areas of discussion and blue is the sphere of influence, existing zoning compared to the alternatives. And so what you see is that the base and the expansion have about the same in terms of the areas that allow 6 stories, but the core and the distributed drop both of those compared to the base, and all are lower than what existing zoning is. There's also the question of how many acres of agricultural land could be converted to urban uses. So the base has 0 acres of agricultural land converted to urban uses. The core has a little bit of 77. The expansion has a lot at almost 1,000 acres, and distributed has 630. And again, we know that there's a whole process of public vote needing to have this happen. This is just the beginning of the discussion about whether the city would even allow it to happen through the process. We did dive deeper, as I mentioned. There's 11 areas of discussion, and each area of discussion has alternatives that correspond to the 3, the core, the expansion, and the distributed. I'm not going to go into detail in them except to show you what you will find on the website. So these are going to be discussed more at the community council meetings. So here's an example of Johnson. You see that this is a map of the base land use designations with some text describing it. You can see Johnson Drive and 101. And then what we did for each of the alternatives is we outlined where the changes would be in the land use map. and then what it was changing from. So for example, here, this area outlined in yellow, that's purple, the proposal in this alternative is mixed use 2, which corresponds to 4 stories. And this is changing from a variety of different designations, including commercial, general heavy industrial, and mixed use 4. So you can see that we do this for each of the alternatives, and we show how they change, what areas change, and what they change from and to. So we tried to outline it. One of the comments that came out of the previous meeting was there wasn't enough clarity. It was too hard to see. So we spent the time over the last few days to organize some of this information and be able to present it. The other area, just again to show you, this is downtown. We know that there's a lot of concern over any changes to the downtown. This reflects the base land use designations, which correspond directly with what's allowed in the city's form-based code and specific plan for the downtown. We then created a series of alternatives. And the theme, again, is that the core focuses around the downtown and the corridors around the downtown. And so this one would have the most land use changes. The expansion, which focuses to the east, has very little change to the based on compared to the base. And then the distributed has more moderate changes. So again, with each of them, we tried to show you what it changes from. For example, mixed use 1 would go to mixed use 2. And so we tried to show you what that difference is in each of the alternatives. We have this for all of the 9 areas of discussion, or sorry, all of the 11, and these are the additional 9 that I didn't show you. Okay, with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and then it is time for question and answer. We can take questions on the alternatives, how we got to that, on the land use designations, on how other ways to provide input or to get your questions answered. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then we can go ahead and start. Susan, I'll turn it over to you for more.
So just a reminder that all these alternatives that are being explored right now. Nothing is being recommended. So that's why your questions and your input are so important, because there'll be another iteration of these for you to review at another point. So just keep that in mind as you're making your comments and asking your questions. I did see there's a lot of really great dialogue happening and comments in the chat. And so thank you all for your participation there. Those will all be part of the notes from this meeting and taken into the account as a summary of what's been happening in this call, just so you're aware that all of those are being taken into account. So with that, just a reminder that this period, we're really looking for questions. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask and get an answer from the consulting team or the city team, this is the best place to do that. We also, following the Q&A, we'll have a time for public comment. So if you feel like yours is just a comment you want to be able to say, might be best to save that for the public comment period. Up to you. We're welcome to you participate how you'd like, but just a note that that's how we're kind of dividing. So we're going to spend about the next maybe 20 minutes or so to answer questions, and then we'll move into the more formal public comment period. And so I see a couple of hands up. So we'll start with Mark Martinez, and I will unmute you, Mark. Go ahead.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me on your end?
Yes.
Awesome, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a very insightful presentation. I had one question. I know we're looking at land use alternatives, and there's a lot of discussion about just keeping Ventura how it is and kind of trying to maintain the character. For the general plan, if we decided to stay with the current zoning designations, the current arena allocations, would there be any negative consequences to this, or would it be able to just kind of go along as we've been going?
So I'm not sure who wants to answer that. Maybe Matt, do you want to take a stab?
Peter, do you want to take a stab first?
Yeah, Mark, at least on my computer, you cut out a little bit when you're asking your question, but I think your question was, if we just stick with our current general plan and what our current housing element has, are there
negative ramifications?
Negative ramifications, thank you. Our current general plan allows for quite a lot of growth. As Matt has shown, there are a lot of areas of the city that allow 6 stories. that we actually are putting forth alternatives suggesting we lower them in some spots. There are some alternatives that do look at, are there some spots that could be 6 if certain other areas are lowered? So if we didn't change the general plan, then we would have the rules as we have them now. In future housing element cycles, we may be faced with trying to find more sites to rezone at that time, and that happens every 8 years. Whereas if we plan for 27 years of growth now, that could lead to having to go into this fewer times in the future. But at this point, I think any of the alternatives being talked about are within the realm of possibility, which is why they are out there as options.
And when you see the survey, just to really quickly add to that, Mark, and everyone else, when you see the survey, it's not a choice of core, expansion, or distributed. The options are base, core, distributed, expansion, or other, and you can share your ideas of what that is. So again, we want to make sure we know it's an option. We want to make sure it's an option to keep things the way they are in the zoning.
I see a couple additional hands raised, so we'll go to Gina and then Mike Malloy after that. So Gina, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question about where did the people that are on, that are doing and putting together all the survey information, how were they picked? And then my other question is that, are you going to still be talking to HOAs? Unfortunately, not unfortunately. Unfortunately, our HOA did not know this was happening, so we could not poll our residents or give any information, and we are right on the avenue. I am the president of the Paseo Del Mar HOA, and so we would like to have some input because we have 231 homes. And so that's my other question. And then you say you did all these surveys, but this was during a time of COVID, and a lot of us, well, some of us were working on the front lines, and a lot of us were not going into public buildings, but we're isolating. So I guess my third question is the information you got before, is that weighed more that you're going to listen to that than the surveys that you're doing and the information that's coming in for the last couple of meetings?
So thank you. Yeah, let me jump in and try and answer those 3 questions really quickly. So the surveys that are coming out on the land use alternatives, everyone is open to taking them. It is completely open. The input that went into a lot of different, a lot of the ideas came from the General Plan Advisory Committee, as well as the surveys that were done previously. And they were all done for the most part online. There were emails sent out throughout newsletters. Gina, I don't know why you were not part of that list for whatever reason why your HOA is, and I can't talk about that. I'm sorry that you and your community were not part of that, but we absolutely welcome your participation at this point. And so this goes for you and for anyone else. If you want to try and set up a time for us to talk about this and do our best to meet with you during this time, please reach out. We're happy to do that. We want as much input as we can with that. And again, for those who have not joined, we're really glad you're here. This is about dialogue and it's about communication. And this is the beginning, and we have a couple months of this. So reach out, let's talk.
And maybe,
okay?
Peter, you could just briefly describe the process of hiring the team and the role that the city staff still has. It's led by city staff.
Yes. The Ramey Associates team was the top company firm through a request for proposals that the city published, I believe, 2019. Contract was awarded by council, and so all of the work that's being done is being reviewed by city staff and my department. I'm the director of the community development department. We also have a general plan advisory committee that is, in my opinion, a very good sounding board for the general plan team, where ideas and concepts are talked about. And it's fully recognized that the future growth of the community for the next 27 years is not going to be an easy conversation or quick. There's lots of ideas out there, lots of different perspectives. So whether you are just starting to get involved now or if you've been involved from the beginning, nothing's decided. So as Matt says, we're glad you're here now, and keep on participating.
Thanks, Peter. So we'll go to Mike and then John.
Sorry, Susan and
Sorry, go ahead, Heather.
I just wanted to help Gina with her question too. I dropped a direct link into the chat. If you are not currently registered for our e-blast list, we definitely send out 2 a month, if not more, as soon as there's the latest and greatest available or news out there. That's where we send it from. So if you go ahead and sign up through that e-blast list, you'll get all future communications too. And Gina, if you want to connect with me directly, glad to talk with you also.
Thanks, Heather. So Mike Malloy, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Or you can unmute yourself, I should say. Looks like, there we go.
There we go. Can these zones as proposed be changed? And if so, how do we go about that process? Such as on Mills, the east side of Mills butts up against a residential area. And that is currently zoned where you can get up to 6 stories. How can we change that? It might restrict that up against a residential area to maybe a smaller mixed zone where they can only go up maybe two stories.
Yeah, Mike, let me answer that really quickly. So yes, they absolutely, these are ideas as a starting point. And while we presented 3 alternatives, and I probably didn't emphasize this enough, the alternative, the preferred direction that the council will probably have in front of them and then select will likely be a combination of all of these 3 and then changes from all of these 3, right? So there's new ideas that are going to come in that will move through the process. So the way that you do that is the surveys are going to have some ways for you to provide comments on each of those different areas. And then you can also come to the office hours that we're going to be having, 1 in person and 2 online, and give those recommendations there, or you can actually draw on a map and send them and give a recommendation through the website, and we will get that as well. So nothing is set in stone. This is all the beginning of the conversation.
Let's go to John Ritchie. Should be able to there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I got about 4 questions. They're all a little variety of which, but some are short, some are longer. Will your group be reviewing the chat comments as part of its analysis? There's a lot of great ideas in there.
I'm going to say yes on that right away. Yes.
Okay. Is site parking and traffic impacted by development addressed in the general plan, or is the city forced to deal with it as a post-development problem? Is that something that's written in to these things? Like, you know, I don't know. So I was curious about that.
So are you, traffic and parking related to the change in the designation?
Right, we're telling them they can be more dense in this area. Obviously, that's going to affect parking and traffic. Is that part of the general plan, or is that a traffic problem to resolve later after the development? You know, I didn't know if it was part of this.
I think that's probably a quick answer too, right, Matt? Do you want to?
Yeah, just really quickly. The general plan has high-level policies related to parking. I'll take parking first, related to parking, but the zoning code, which will be amended afterwards, is really where the specifics of the number of parking spaces per unit or per 1,000 square feet is addressed. And then traffic is actually part of this. The city is working on an active transportation plan right now, which looks at active transportation. And then we will be looking at both vehicle miles traveled, which is the new way of looking at impacts for environmental documents, as well as level of service, which is delay in traffic. We're not going to do that until we have the preferred direction, because it's pretty time consuming to do. So we're going to wait for that preferred direction first. But yes,
so it is captured to a degree at nearer the end. Okay, because they kind of go hand in hand. Okay. The other is the Victoria corridor that will be proposed or is being worked on. Will that supersede the Moon Drive overlay and negate it? Or I don't know, or you may not know the answer right now. So.
Do you mean the Victoria corridor code?
So yeah. There is something called the Moon Drive overlay at the southeast side of the Victoria corridor that was developed in 1984. It's kind of a arcane little typed up document for all those properties.
Yeah. Okay, John.
I was curious if this supersedes and negates that existence after this is done. Or, you know, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Joan, just as you mentioned, don't know now, depending on what's decided. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I know you may not have the answer. I just wanted to put it out there.
And if you want to come and talk to us at the office hours about it and sit down and look at the maps, then let's do that, okay?
Sure, and I can provide the documents. I have them looked up already. Great. And then the last was, can you provide, or can you explain a little more deeply what the California arena number mandate is and why our city has to comply? I think it helped. When I understood that, it helped explain to me a lot of why this is happening and what the ramifications are. So it's not driven by this isn't all driven by the city. This is driven by the state. So that helped me to maybe a different or deeper understanding for other folks might be beneficial. So, and I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Here, I'm going to let you answer this one.
Matt, did you say Peter?
Yes, he did.
Okay, sorry. Maybe my speakers aren't working that well. So yes, there are certain amount of planning for housing that we are required to do by state, and it's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or sometimes Regional Housing Needs Allocation, RHNA, people call it RHNA. All cities are assigned a number, and you have to show how you have land that is planned for that. City doesn't build housing. We set the allowed land uses, and we set the zoning. Private property owners choose whether to allow their property to be developed. They have to meet the rules and so on and so forth. So the short answer is every 8 years, we have to do a plan that shows enough space for a certain number of units. This last cycle, it was 5,312, I believe. And there was a prior slide that Matt had that showed that since a general plan is supposed to look at a longer time frame, and this general plan is going to go to 2050, so we're calling it a 27-year plan, there's going to be multiple RHNA cycles that we are going to have to show the state we have room for housing. So that's part of the basis of why these land use alternatives are projecting to have between 10,000 and 15,000 units of additional growth over that time period, which roughly equates to about 1% of housing growth a year.
And just to maybe add on to that a little bit, there was a couple questions in the chat about the time frame, the horizon. The general plan is updated periodically every 5 to 10 years. The housing element numbers change. So we're planning for a point in time, but that can be updated in future rounds of the updates as well.
Yeah, we're planning to 2050, which is about 3.5 RHNA cycles. The RHNA number that Peter gave, the 5,300 housing units, was very high across the state, not just in Ventura, but everywhere. We don't know if it's going to be that high next time. So, 3 times RHNA cycle might be overshooting, but 2 is probably a lot closer. The general plan is supposed to be updated every 15 to 20 years or 10 to 15 years. We're at 17. It's a long process to do this. So we want to make sure that we're getting it right this time so we don't have to do it again. But you can also tweak the general plan in between those times as well.
So we've got about 5 hands raised. So let's go ahead and answer those questions, and then we might be able to move right into public comment at that point. So let's go Lori and then Sandra. So Lori.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Matt. Hi, everybody. Thanks for everybody's hard work on this mammoth effort. I have a question, and you gave some sort of indicator about this, Matt. If you were a Venturan and trying to assess these alternatives and chew on them and give feedback on what you think the best one or what you think the best variation of them are, and then addressing all the aspects like density, traffic, open space, all the elements that make up our city. How would you approach doing it? One of the things I heard you say was take the maps and mark them up and send them into the cities. It's kind of daunting on how to approach getting the feedback and what steps along the way. So if you can just speak to that for us, that would be super helpful. I know for me and maybe for others too. Thank you.
Yeah, that's that is, I think, one of the most important things to pick up this evening. And nice to see you, Lori. Lori and I have communicated over the last year and a half on this, so we're certainly in close communication with a lot of folks. So we are, again, this is just the start. We're going to have an online survey, and there's going to be one survey for each of those areas of discussion, and then a citywide survey. That is one way to give input. That we ask for some choices, we focus on a couple different areas, but that's not everything. A second way is to come to the office hours, and we can sit down and we can talk about the maps. We can talk about different ideas. And again, we're going to be having those meetings over we have 3 planned, and we may have more planned. We are going to meet with the community councils, and we will dive deeper into each of the different areas. So on the 7th, Lori is the West Side, as you know. And so we're going to have the maps, we're going to have virtual, it'll be a hybrid meeting, and we'll be able to look at those maps and provide some comments. And then, if the community councils or individuals want to talk to us, we can try and arrange as best to arrange a time. You can also print a map, circle it, and write your ideas down. It is true. We are going to get thousands and thousands of comments. And there is a big question about how do we as a team sort through all of that? Oh, Katrina, your daughter's waking. Hi. So we are going to get thousands and thousands of comments. We are going to make all of those comments publicly available so where everyone can see what we have. And then we try and put those together. We bring them to the GPAC, the General Plan Advisory Committee, and then we take them to council. And so the reality is, there's a lot of differences of opinion in this community. There's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences, and sorting through that is a challenge. And we will do our best to daylight everything and give the choices to the council, who will ultimately decide.
And one other recommendation might be, before taking the online survey, is that you do attend the office hours or go to council meetings and just have a really what you might consider a pretty full understanding of all the information. That way, when you do take the survey, you feel ready to do that, because the survey can be pretty overwhelming as well.
There is no rush. There is no rush to take the survey. You don't have to do it now. And we broke it into smaller surveys so that you could take it over time, and you could do it at your leisure over the next month or 2.
So let's go with Sandra and then Marilyn. So Sandra, I'll unmute you.
Okay, it's Paul rather than.
Okay. Well, we'll take yours, Paul.
I heard a number, both of your graph and Mr. Gildas repeated it, that expected growth, residential growth, is about 1% a year. I was very happy to see that number. That's considered slow growth, I think, under anybody's definition. I didn't quite understand the numbers in commercial growth. They were a little bit harder, a little bit more confusing. But my point is that Ventura is a very nice place to live, and we all want to see it stay that way. And the problem with nice places to live is everybody wants to move there. And the developers are more than happy to accommodate those people. And it's not just the developers, it's the hardware stores, the plumbing stores, the realtors. Lots of people have a vested interest in growth. So it's an enormous amount of pressure. So what I would like to see is that the statement, a strong statement made someplace, that the goal would be to limit growth to 1%, not just predict that growth will probably be 1%, but actually make a firm attempt to limit growth. That's my comment.
Thank you. Go ahead to Marilyn and then Wendell. So Marilyn, go first.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm a lifelong Ventura and a senior, and it's sad to see how crowded our city is getting and how the character is changing so much. And I thought, I don't know if this is doable at all, but there are lots of open spaces in our state. And if it might be possible to create a whole new district in some of the open spaces. I don't mean the farmland. I'm just picking at random, maybe Lancaster. I don't have a map in front of me, where affordable housing city could be established with its own identity and character and its own space. So we're not so pinched and crowded, and the character being changed of our unique neighborhoods that we have. So I don't know if that's too far out of thought, but I thought I would just share it.
Thank you for your comment, Marilyn. Wendell? You are unmuted.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. This is actually directed to Matt. With the a big part of the challenge here is trying to lower the cost of housing. And have you in your planning endeavors found a way, or have any communities figured out a way to limit the commercial ownership of residential real estate? So, in other words, how can you take Wall Street out of the equation, or limit Wall Street's effect on the cost of housing locally from a planning perspective, or is that even possible? Thank you.
Wendell, I love that question. It really is. It's a really forward-thinking question, and that is, at the core of that is, I think, that housing and a good place to live that is not too expensive really is kind of a basic human right. And how do we make it so that actually happens? Because right now, in our state, in our country, it's not, and it's really a problem. There are places that are exploring new models of housing and building housing. They've been around for years, but people are still exploring them. Co-op housing. So there are models that exist. It is a little bit outside of the general plan, but I think that there may be ways of creatively thinking about how to make housing types which could be co-op or ownership by the residents, or development by the residents, more affordable and able to happen. It is very tough. I will not lie to you. It is very tough, but it is a great idea and something to certainly explore. So maybe we can talk offline about a little bit of that in some places that are doing it.
Thanks, Matt. So we have Yvonne and then Brian Collins. So Yvonne, I have unmuted you.
Hi, I'm actually piggybacking on that a little bit. It was mentioned that the property owner sells to the developer. Does the city have any input about what they build there? I mean, the new buildings that have gone up along Thompson are 600,000 and up and 800,000 and up. They don't go along with all, they don't match the ambience of the rest of the buildings, and they're much too high. I lost my house and I live in a 1-bedroom apartment now, and I'd like to get into something big, and there's no way that we can afford that. And the second question is, a lot of us, I got onto this workshop specifically because I heard that there were plans that you may be building on top of shops in the downtown district. Is there any way that you can tell us that you will not be doing that?
So Matt, let me start with that. Let me start with the second question. The shops in downtown, particularly on Main Street, where Main Street Moves is at, most of those shops are, many of those shops are landmarks, are historic. We can't stop an owner from applying to do something with their site, but if it's already a historic landmark, there is an incredible process that you have to go through. So I don't believe that from the city standpoint, one of the reasons none of the alternatives look at providing additional heights in that part of downtown is for the reason we want that to stay basically how that is. So we don't have any plans that we're moving forward to tear down historic buildings or put buildings on top of existing historic buildings. Your first question is a more challenging one, as many of these questions are. There's issues with housing affordability and what has been proposed and what has been built on, for example, Thompson, those did go through a process. One of the ways to determine what is allowed is this conversation, the land use designations, as in what are the uses allowed, what are the heights that are going to be considered. My understanding is the things that were being built on Thompson right now or have just completed, those all comply with the rules, the general plan that's in place now and such. So they did go through a process, and one of the things we're talking about is, are there changes to the land use designations that we want to do moving forward for the next version of this general plan? Matt, do you have anything you want to add in?
Okay. So I'm getting a few direct messages in the chat for speaking. So I'm trying to keep up on those. If you want to just go ahead and request to all, that way I can make sure that Netta and Simran see that as well. So I don't want to miss you. So I think I've got Bob, Wendy, and then Carl lined up for after Brian. But I also saw LM was trying to raise a hand, and there we go. I see your hand up now, LM. So you are now in line too. So let's go with Brian first, and then we'll go with LM, and then followed with a few others that have messaged. So go ahead, Brian. Oh, there you go. Brian, you're unmuted.
There we go. Appreciate your time. Thanks for taking all of our questions off the cuff like this. My question is around what community are we trying to model ourselves after? As far as, if we look at other coastal communities or other, communities throughout California, is there kind of like a, maybe not like a gold standard, but something that we're trying to be? Ventura hasn't developed at the rate of other communities that maybe are south of us and things like that. Is there something that we're kind of aiming towards here?
I'd say for the dialogue we've had at the General Plan Advisory Committee and all of the community input that we've seen, it's modeling yourself after Ventura. I mean, that's what we've heard most, is that people want to keep Ventura Ventura and grow to be a new Ventura, or maybe a slightly different Ventura, but still be Ventura. I don't know, Matt, Peter, if you have additional.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it perfectly. I think it's important, maybe, Matt, that we all say it. Yes, we are not trying to model any of this off of any other city. The things you're seeing in the alternatives that have been put together, as Matt have said, these are ideas that came from community input, and they are varied. And the purpose of these alternatives being published is to have this dialogue, to have all the residents start to talk about what should the future be, so that we can get feedback, so that the eventual plan represents the best balance of what the entire community wants.
Yeah, and I would just really quickly, I would really encourage everyone to go on the website and dive deep into the surveys and read the comments that people made there, because what you're going to see is across the board a love for Ventura and for Ventura being Ventura. We hear that loud and clear. That has come through more than anything. And then what we heard after that is a wide divergence. And I can tell you, we just got emails after the Tuesday workshop where someone was like, don't build anything else. We want to stay the way we are. And then another comment right after that came in that said, upzone everywhere in the city. We need more housing. Right. So, that's the range of things we're dealing with. But I think ultimately everyone really loves Ventura and wants it to remain a special place.
So go ahead, LM. If you were able to.
Hi, yeah. So in terms of the way we frame things, we're using, the word evolve and word development. And I think that we're well past the days when we can equate development with something that's going to be positive for citizens. And so what I would like, I think you're hearing in different words from different people, is that we want to evolve into a people, citizen-centered community. And, Ventura has been innovative all along the line in terms of how it's dealt with land use, homelessness, the environment, so many areas. We have been groundbreaking. And I'd like to see us take a look. Let's face it, where does the rubber meet the road? It is if this development provides diversity and provides actual affordable housing. That's not happening. If you look at all these units, you'll see at best 10 to 15% are air quotes affordable based on the ridiculous, well, for some people, many of us, what's a very high standard for, income basis, median income for Ventura. So here's the trade-off. It's not worth it to be sacrificing our infrastructure, our environment, air quality, traffic, if we aren't going to get a return, which is affordable housing where the next generation can live and where an average working person can live, because that's what's happening now. Developers are exploiting these mandates and the wish that real desire from all of us to provide affordable housing. So we need to get real with this. What are the rents going to be? What are the prices going to be? What percentage? Because all of us are otherwise, we're subsidizing these developers by paying taxes for roads, for the schools, although fewer schools are declining because fewer families can afford to be here. Water, that we are subsidizing their development to sell extraordinarily expensive real estate. And I lived for 2 decades in a coastal community that was totally trashed. I can tell you, it doesn't lead to affordability. If anything, the affordability has gone down with the increased development. So I just hope that this is, we really keep our eye on the ball here. And I feel like looking at infrastructure and environmental impact are also need to be done simultaneously. I hear it's expensive, so I don't know enough to even suggest how that be covered, but that needs to inform the direction and inform our decisions. I'm concerned about this happening afterwards.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everyone for your, thank you very much.
Oops. Sorry,
Susan?
I was trigger happy there, yes.
No,
Sorry.
I'm done, thank you.
Netta, did you have a?
Yeah, Susan, Lynn Rollins had also
Yes, I
commented
saw.
in the chat.
I have her in my, so I have 5 people lined up for the last round of questions, and then I think we want to move into public comment. If you think what you have is a public comment, then if you'd rather do it there, you can put that into the chat and we'll move you into that section instead. But looks like I have Bob, Wendy, Carol, Lynn, and then I see Ben has his hand raised there as well. So let's go to Bob, and I'll find you here on the list, Bob, unless somebody finds Bob first. There you are, Bob. You're unmuted. I think I had unmuted you. Bob, go ahead. All right, well, maybe we'll come back to Bob. Wendy, let me find Wendy. Go ahead, Wendy, you're unmuted.
Hi, it's actually Bob. We've got 2 computers going. Just a second.
Oh, you're having some trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you. A little echoey, but when we go for it.
It's because we've got 2 computers close together. There was a comment made tonight, and I'll just paraphrase it. This was at the beginning of the meeting. There are no plans to put 6-story buildings on historic Main Street. And historic Main Street's probably 4 or 5 blocks of Main Street. So that's pretty qualified. That makes up a very small percentage of downtown and makes up no percentage of Midtown. And I, like a lot of people, are concerned with putting tall buildings, 5, 6-story buildings in downtown, Midtown, or really anywhere. But I understand we have to have the housing. The statement that there really is no plans for that. Well, what makes me concerned is a statement that was put into the housing element that was approved by City Council and submitted to the state in January. And I'd like to read that specific paragraph that makes me concerned. And again, I think a lot of people are made concerned by this. It's the 8-year objectives. It's paragraph 18.3, and it reads, increased allowed heights for residential use in the form-based codes such as downtown and midtown to be more compatible to the allowable height by right in commercial and industrial districts by the end of 2023. Now, I know that more comparable is a arguable term, but the fact that we allow 3, 4, and 5-story buildings in downtown already, and this statement specifically says increased allowed heights, so that they're more comparable with, in the implication, and it is an implication, it's pretty hard to argue, with 6-story allowability in the commercial areas. So if there really are no plans to do this, I would be put at ease by removing this from the housing element. It hasn't been approved by the state. I don't know if it's possible to change it. But if it is, it would put me at ease, and I believe it would put an awful lot of people at ease, and it could even extend to the downtown Ventura partners. So that's all I wanted to say tonight, but it's that statement that makes me very concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Did you want to address that now, Peter, or is that just, I think we'll just take that in as a suggestion. Okay. Lynn Rowans, let me unmute you.
Yeah, thank you. If you're serious about outreach, we're not talking about office hours, we're not talking about anything like that. We're not talking about things you do online. People grocery shop. These maps should be in front of every grocery store in Ventura. They need to be publicly available at a level that nothing is so far, because the rest of it's really pro forma. Okay, the rest of it's dealing with people who are sophisticated, with people who have certain kinds of predilections. So if you really are serious, it'll be in front of grocery stores. It'll be in places, it'll be in front of Home Depot. It'll be or Lowe's or wherever. It'll be in front of Trader Joe's, wherever it needs to be. Okay, to have this be a serious outreach. And the other thing I wanted to note is how quickly the notion of water disappeared from the conversation, which is the primary overriding element here.
Thank you, Lynn, for those suggestions. Those are great locations for those pop-up workshops that we talked about. So setting up in different areas.
No pop-ups, not pop-ups,
well,
not pop-ups.
In front of a Home Depot. Yeah.
Serious maps posted.
Yes.
So that people can see them. You got your kids in tow, doesn't matter. You can stop and see the maps.
Great,
okay?
Thank you so much.
That's helpful.
Perfect. And I think, Wendy, because you and Bob were together, maybe I didn't allow you to make your comment separately. So let me go back to Wendy. Go ahead. I think I've unmuted you, Wendy.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to agree with Bob's comments regarding item 18.3 in the housing element, basically allowing downtown and midtown to go higher. That's already in the housing element. And I think if we were able to amend it and delete it, all of the comments about the 6 stories going downtown that people are concerned about will feel much better about. So I hope that can happen. And, it's a smoking gun here. So really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. And our last question before we move to more formal public comment, which is kind of a continuation of what we're doing here, is Ben. So Ben, I'm going to unmute you. So Ben Cohn.
All right, so I guess I'm going to ask a little bit of a question, a little bit of a comment, just so we can go with that segue. And that is, could we bring the Ventura Unified School District into this conversation? And the reason why is because from what I've seen before in the past and studying historical real estate, what really drives a community to build and to get better as a whole is the school district. That's the foundation of a community. And Ventura Unified School District has had huge disenrollment numbers. And some people might argue that it is because of affordability housing. And others like myself may argue that it's because of what's being taught in the schools. And with 2 kids, one graduated and one currently in the school system, I see it right now. And I see the quote unquote advocacy, and it's well-intended, but it's extremely self-destructive for a long-term community to build. And so I would just ask that, especially now with the new superintendent, I think it would be a critical time for us to just as Venturians, whether we've lived here for a long time or a transplant as myself, if you care about Ventura, look at what the school system is teaching and get involved with the school board. And the second comment I would make is, could we also take a look at larger employers? For instance, Camarillo has Haas, and Haas is working with Ventura High School on the manufacturing. Those are skilled jobs that can come to Ventura, and would do great. We have Patagonia. That's another thing. How do we get these large employers and entice them here? And we provide our children with the skills and education to get jobs that they're not going to have to worry about affordable housing, which once again, it sounds great in theory, but it's extremely self-destructive. Thank you for your time. Have a good night.
Thank you, Ben. Let me just really quickly respond to that. Just so that, as you know, the school district is not part of the city. And I think the encouragement of people to get involved in the school district is great. We certainly talk to them as part of the general plan related to growth projections. What they teach is not in the general plan purview, but I certainly, as someone who has kids in public schools, I certainly encourage everyone to get involved in that. The second is the large employers. I mentioned previously that we're proposing a land use designation for office and R&D and to have space for that. And one of the reasons for that was to try and give a clear signal for office uses to be able to come to the city. And so, we had been thinking about that as part of the process, and there are varying degrees of that in the different alternatives. And so, yes, it is certainly continued economic development is certainly important for the city because it brings in tax revenues, which helps pay for the things that people in the community love.
And Matt, if I could just also add, we also have a member from the Ventura Unified School District who is a member of the General Plan Advisory Committee, who's also part of that and using that too as a network for the Unified District.
Great. So let's move into our more formal public comment. And if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and raising your hand if you've been waiting to make a more formal public comment, just so we know approximately how many people would like to speak. And then we can be sure to give you that amount of time, make sure we have enough time to still try to get people out of here in a reasonable amount of time. Just a few guidelines we just wanted to bring up, and I don't think we'll have to worry about this evening, but we do thank you for requesting to speak. We really do value public input throughout the entire meeting, of course, but also in this more formal public comment period. When you are speaking, just of course refrain from using loud, profane, or threatening, or any kind of personally abusive language, of course, and avoid engaging in any other disorderly conduct or disruptive behavior that would impede what has been so far a really orderly public meeting and workshop. So just a few notes on that before we jump in. And I see about, 5 or 6 folks. So let's try to limit your, let's limit your speaking to about 2 minutes. And I will let you know when your 2 minutes are up. So let's start with Mark, and then we'll go to Dania. Let's go Mark first.
Hi, hello. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, you're fine.
Awesome, wonderful. Hi, once again, my name is Mark Martinez Velasquez. I've been a lifelong resident of Ventura. Growing up, low income, I definitely see how housing can definitely impact a lot of our lower income residents, our neighbors, in very, very meaningful ways. I've just, after viewing the alternatives and viewing this presentation, I don't think that SOAR areas should be touched. I know that comes to a vote of the people, and so that's probably a non-starter. But I do think that, building higher, especially in like central nodes of neighborhoods, for instance, like the Victoria corridor is something that's served by at least 2 different transit lines going up to Thompson and Main Street. It's also served by the 6 and the 16. Those are really good areas for development, especially with the possible passing of the latest assembly bill that can get rid of parking minimums around transit stops. So definitely those areas that are well served by transit are prime candidates for upzoning. I want everyone to have a view. I want people to be able to live where they grew up. I definitely want to be able to move back once I'm done with my degree. So yeah, I want to thank you all so much. I know it's been a very hectic past few weeks. But But yeah, really, thank you so much for your work and all the information you've been giving out. I think it's very important, and I hope you have a really good night.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I do want to apologize. I neglected to have Carol Spector make her comment before, and so I'm going to squeeze her up a little bit more in advance. Sorry, Carol, your hand wasn't raised there on the screen, and I missed you. So let's, I don't know if Lily, if you can find her faster than me, if you could unmute her, that would be great. No one's alphabetical on my screen. So.
I got her.
Carol, go ahead.
Okay, I'm there. Thank you so much. First of all, I'm so impressed by the quality of comments in the chats, from affordability to SOAR uses to everything else. It's just amazing that we share such a love of Ventura. I'm just going to speak about housing element 18.3 also. It does say to increase heights for residential use in form-based codes, downtown and midtown, to be comparable to commercial heights. And so in theory, all these plans and promises and stickers and things that we're promising now, if that's in the housing element that is approved by the state in 2023, I'm concerned then they'll say, look, it's in the housing element and we can go up 6 stories. And again, once we get density bonuses, it will go up to 7 and 8. So I really hope that there's something that can be done about that. Also, just affordability, all these new projects that are going up. I know they got density bonuses for affordable units, but $80,000 is considered moderate income and they're getting density bonuses for that. And that's not serving our population at all. So affordability, heights, great concerns. And again, just shout out to LM. I loved your comments and everybody else's. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Let's go to Dania Barrios or Danya. I'm not sure. Sorry. You are unmuted.
Hi, Haku. My name is Dana Barrios. I am the chairwoman of the Barbareño Ventureño Band of Chumash Indians here in Ventura County. I first want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to be able to speak. And in listening to everybody and listening to all the comments, I think for me, one of the biggest issues is the ethnographic analysis of really the area here in Ventura County. I think understanding the importance of places like Tortilla Flats down by Ventura Avenue, understanding our Chumash sacred sites, cultural resources, not to mention the impacts of our animal and plant relatives here in Ventura County, especially in Ventura, the city. There are numerous sacred sites all around where everybody is looking to build and rebuild. And it makes me really nervous. And it makes me nervous in regards to the lack of consultation with us Chumash people. I think the lack of taking our culture and our history into consideration and the lack of people of color being involved in some of these conversations. I think a lot more outreach needs to be done to those communities because we are the communities that are impacted the most. Like I said, I do appreciate you guys doing this, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I'm more than happy to assist, but there's a lot of other elements to think about that unless you're native or unless you're from this area and your ancestors have been here for thousands of years, it's not something that you really think about. And that's okay, and it makes sense. But when the opportunity comes up, you really need to engage with that and understand how your plan can be of service to all community members.
Thank you so much. And if you have specific ideas, we certainly would love to hear them for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wendell. Go ahead, Wendell.
Thank you. Well, there's been a lot of criticism about the existing general plan, that it has no teeth, so to speak, that it really is kind of a nebulous document that does not really give any firm direction of how the city is really quantifiably able to move forward. I guess it's part question, but it's also part statement that how is this general plan going to be any different? And I would encourage the founders of this or the people involved in this to make sure that we don't make the same mistake we made in the last go around, and that we create a document and a vision that can be carried out with some authority. So I guess that's the end of my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendell. Allison Leety?
It's Leet. Unmuted, yes?
Yes, you're unmuted.
All right. Yeah, I'm Allison Leet. I'm an educator with the Ventura County of Education with an emphasis on career technical education. And I am also a sculptor. And I wanted to bring attention to the city to reconsider the designation of Dubber Street as a residential zone. As many of us know, that is the place of Art City Studios. That is a hub of creativity. Works from that studio have graced, and they still grace, Ventura government official buildings, our open parks. It is a vital spot of Ventura and part of our culture and part of our charm. So I just want the city to reevaluate and respect the treasures of all kinds that our community has. So thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Next would be Tanner Shelton. And then we have Amy Sherry after that.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here this evening and allowing public comments. I first really want to thank staff for their engagement efforts thus far. It's great to see the conversation tonight, and I really just appreciate staff and the consultant and all the work they've been doing. The attitudes online haven't reflected, I think, the appreciation we all have for the work you're putting in for our community on this effort. I want to speak tonight that housing is the key to solving a lot of the problems our community has. Housing, if done right and done in a dense, walkable fashion, can solve a lot of the environmental impacts in our community. Density results in less water use per individual unit, less greenhouse gas emission, less vehicles miles traveled, and creates a more vibrant community where folks can walk to work, walk to shops, walk to things like that. And it's very important. It also solves a lot of our problems with jobs. You know, Ventura struggled at attracting employers because of the lack of affordable housing that our community has. By providing affordable housing and housing at a wide array of incomes, very low workforce, and above moderate income, we can attract more employers to the city, increasing our economic vitality. And then also affordability will really help with the acute homeless problems and things we see in the community by making housing more affordable for all by increasing the supply. I really support the densification of the Midtown corridors and densification throughout the city. I think that's a really progressive, forward-thinking idea. Unfortunately, what I hear a lot of is we can't go upwards and we also can't go upwards or can't go outwards. I really think that neither is not an option for our community. If we do that, I think we lose one of the best things that makes Ventura a wonderful place to live, which is its multi-generational, people who have lived here, their grandparents have lived here, their parents have lived here, and their kids live here now. The issue is the next generation. If we do not build housing, we'll continue to force more and more people away from this community because they simply can't afford to live in the place they grow up.
Thank you, Tim.
So I appreciate you all. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Amy, and then our final public comment tonight will be Robert Guthrie. So Amy, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, everyone. This is a good meeting. Excuse me. I just want, sorry.
Okay.
Kind of want to go back to the 18.3 of the housing element. I guess I have a question. It's not certified yet, correct? So I guess my question is all of the industrial, like say on the Avenue and the C1A, and you say, that's now residential. Is that because of this, or when did that become residential? Basically, because you can't build on industrial land, and now you're saying you can. So I want to know where that came from. And since it's not certified, that 18.3, the whole housing element, is it still the 2018, before the 2018 zoning cutoff, or we're not allowed to downsize? If so, then why are we up zoning? Let's see, down zoning 2018. And again, with the comparable heights of the commercial and industrial. So if one area was 3 stories, does that mean all those CMXD are not coastal, but just MXDs are now like the zone before it? If it was industrial, now it's MXD 6 stories. Is that what the comparable is? If it was a 45-foot tall commercial space, now it could be a 45-foot tall mixed use building. Just want to know where all these came from.
Thank you, Amy.
I think that's the most damaging thing to the city is that one simple little statement, which is 18.3. Thank you
very much for your comments. And then last, but certainly not least, Robert Guthrie. Let me unmute you here. Go ahead, Robert, and thanks for your patience.
No problem. I already spoke, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak again. And I'd just like to reiterate there were a lot of good comments in the chat, and I think it was a good meeting.
Got a little bit of feedback from you, Robert. It might be on 2 devices, perhaps. That sometimes gets...
Yes. I didn't need to speak a second time.
Okay. I guess I had that from earlier. You asked for public comment, but you must have asked your comment or stated your comment or your question earlier. Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. Well, we certainly appreciate everyone's passion and your comments and your care for the city expressed this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Matt to make some closing comments and just remind everyone what those opportunities are for future engagement in this phase of the project.
Thank you. I just want to start by thanking everyone this evening for your comments. You know, as you are hearing, there are many different ideas. Everyone is expressing a deep love of the community. The chat, which I wasn't looking at during and seeing at all during the presenting, but scrolled back through it. I mean, there are so many great comments in there, and we really appreciate the time and the insightfulness that all of you have. As we said, this is really just the beginning. I'm not going to put my screen back up because I've had some issues with that, but we have a series of meetings coming up. Please go to the project website, planventura.com. On the front page and on the tab at the top, you will see land use alternatives, and click on that button, and you will find a list of all of the current meetings we have planned, and we are planning more. So we have we have office hours starting September 13th, 2 virtual and 1 in person. Those are, again, times when we can just sit down and look at maps. We can do it virtually. We can have breakout rooms. We can do it in person. We can explore a lot of these new ideas. We know that we haven't thought of everything and we haven't heard everything yet. So please keep the ideas coming. We are trying our best to balance all of these great ideas that we're getting. Again, we have community council meetings coming up starting next week. We have one on the 7th and one on the 8th. We're going to have pop-up meetings throughout the community, and Lynn, I liked your idea about even just expanding that and having boards throughout the community that are just up that people can look at and write comments on. So we'll see about the viability of that in public places. We have a water educational forum to talk more about water, because we do know that that's a big concern. And then we may have lots of other opportunities as well. So again, I want to thank everyone. If you have specific questions, reach out through the website. There's an email there. We will respond to those. And we really appreciate the time this evening and the thoughts and the insightfulness.
Good evening, everyone. Good night.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.